here this afternoon to the seminars on historical tropes in contemporary anti-Semitism. These seminars bring out the perennial patterns of the phenomenon of anti-Semitism to shed light on why exactly is anti-Semitism the longest hatred. The aim of this series of seminars is to elucidate these millennial themes and the variation on themes of anti-Semitism, to expose and explain why this phenomenon is both ancient and modern, to impart a deeper understanding of how what was once scandal of anti-Semitism has become fashionable in many quarters today, and to enable participants to recognize the phenomenon of anti-Semitism in all its subtle manifestations and to seek ways of responding to it. Some of the themes of this seminar include the anti-Semitic appropriation of what we think of as truth, the blood libel, the concept of purity of blood, the drive for redemption or salvation, and the ubiquitous evil ascribed to Jews. In the end, the series situates many themes that come out of historical Jewish experiences in the contemporary period. Today's seminar is a perfect example of that. Professor Kathy Aron-Beller will speak on Shylock, the Jewish desecrator of Christian images, tracing an allegation. She's going to speak for 40 minutes, and when she concludes her remarks, we will have time for questions, answers, and conversation. So please share your questions in the chat function on your Zoom screen, and then I'll have the opportunity to present those questions to her when we're finished. Originally from London, Dr. Katherine Aron-Beller is a lecturer of Jewish history in the Rothberg International School of the Hebrew University and at Tel Aviv University. Her areas of expertise include medieval Jewish history, early modern Jewish-Christian relations, the early modern Papal Inquisition, and the history of anti-Semitism. In 2007-08, she was a visiting assistant professor at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Until recently, she was also co-editor of H. Judaic, and if you don't know what that is a website which links scholars of Jewish studies and students of Jewish studies around the world, a very, very important position. She is the author of Jews on Trial, The Papal Inquisition in Modena, the co-editor of The Roman Inquisition, Center versus Peripheries, and many articles on the Catholic Inquisition, anti-Semitism, and the Jews of Italy. Her most recent book, Christian Images and Jewish Desecrators, The History of an Allegation, is at present under review. And that, not Shylock, as I mistakenly said, is her topic this afternoon. Since 2020, she has been a visiting scholar of the Stephen Roth Institute for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism and Racism. Now, without further ado, we're going to hear from Professor Kathy Aron-Beller.
Well, good evening from Jerusalem. I hope everybody can hear me. Can you just let me know if you can hear me clearly? Good. Okay. So first of all, thank you so much, Sylvia and El Shaddai and others for arranging this series. I'm excited to be part of it, and I'm learning much from my colleagues. I'm delighted to be here today to tell you about my research that I've been doing pretty much for over 10 years now. I am a medieval and early modern historian, so my emphasis is obviously going to be on the past, but I do think that the allegation that I'm going to talk about today really has found its way into contemporary society, and I will explain this at the end. Well, scholars have in the past discussed the charges of ritual murder, of blood libel, and host desecration, leveled against Jews from the Middle Ages to the present day. But there is no sufficient wide-ranging study of the charge that Jews habitually violated Christian images. So my research really set about tracing the vitality of this trans-historical allegation created by Christians that Jews desecrate Christian sacred images, particularly, as you see here, of Mary and Jesus, and also of the Passion. I have uncovered that the allegation represented a trope in Christian literature and non-literary sources, as well as in judicial accusations. And as I will show you, I believe that the developing attitudes of Christians towards their own religious imagery from the 5th to the 17th century, which crossed boundaries of European states and regions, caused the accusation made by churchmen concerning the Jews' relation with that imagery. And I will explain. So let's just start with definitions. What do I mean by desecration? In my mind, desecration is the most comprehensive term used to describe the Jews' alleged crimes against images, which include such offenses as defilement and defacement. Desecration refers to any form of vandalism other than iconoclasm, which of course is the complete obliteration of an image. Desecration can be hammering, flogging, scourging, soiling, piercing, hitting, hiding, lancing, or stabbing. And according to Christian tales and writings, the Jews' intention is to show contempt for this image, deprive it of the sacred qualities the Jews believed that the Christians had mistakenly attributed to it. Desecration was not blasphemy, a verbal attack, though of course it could be accompanied by blasphemous words. It was an action that one did with one's hands, one's feet, or even eyes to objects and not human beings. Desecration was understood by Christianity to be an intentional Jewish reaction, the inverted response to increasing Christian veneration of images. This could include also covering or hiding the object so that Christians would be prevented from venerating it. So veneration and violation therefore become opposing actions. What the Christian venerates, the Jew is believed to violate. What about the word allegation here? Well, allegation, of course, is an assertion made without proof that individuals or groups of people have done something illegal or morally wrong. An allegation can be very vague and usually found on prejudice, such as a belief system which associates types of suspects, and here we're talking about Jews, with a tendency to commit certain offenses. An allegation, as we will show, has the ability to travel and endure, especially if it is inspired and fed by the needs of the varying society that it serves. An accusation is a charge. On the other hand, different, of course, from an allegation, is a charge laid before a judicial court that a particular person has committed a crime based on evidence of his or her guilt. So my use of the term allegation in my title is very important. It doesn't come with the proof that the Jews actually do this. Now, I want to suggest to you that there are two different themes in the Christian allegation of Jews violating images. The first theme, of course, is a more plausible idea. Judaism is a religion without images, and Christianity venerates images. Jews must be tempted then to attack any Christian image, especially if they're forced into an unwelcome proximity to it. But the second, less plausible theme is a fantastical notion, and this really takes off, and I'm going to show it to you, that Jews share the guilt of their ancestors for the murder of Jesus of Nazareth, and that they are impelled then to repeat this crime by violating images of Christ. The implication is not only that the Jews of ancient Judea put Christ to death, but also that their descendants wish to continue to show their disrespect by attacking any painting or statue that it portrayed or embodied him. And in Christian moral tales, as I'm going to show you, Christian authors accuse Jews of propaganda by actions which unintentionally confirm the truth of Christian beliefs about images, because by attacking it and making the image bleed, they experience the life of the image. The reasoning goes that although Jews do not accept Jesus Christ as Savior, they still are able to experience some power in the image. And this act, of course, represented both a reenactment of the crucifixion as well as an ideological battle. By attacking Christian symbols, Jews not only mock or attack Christ, but Christians as well. And in addition, the effect of desecration usually resulted in the opposite of what Jews intended. And this, I'm talking about the tales and the legends that come out of Christianity. Their actions cause the picture or statue to demonstrate miraculous powers, sometimes in such an awe-inspiring way that the Jews witnessing the miraculous powers of the image will convert to Christianity. And in this way, Christianity achieves a great victory over its most obdurate enemies. If the Jew does not repent, as the Jew did not in this tale, he is usually given a death sentence. So what we have in the history of this allegation are two types of Jews. On the one hand, we have a fictitious Jew accused in Christian desecration tales. And what comes out of this, and what I've been tracing really through many archives in Europe, is that actually we have a real Jew who is put on trial for image desecration in England, France, Germany, Spain, and Italy, and Portugal as well. Of course, as you're going to see with these tales and allegations, were ideological and part of a larger effort to convince Christians of the sanctity of images and to further anti-Jewish myth-making in an increasingly intolerant medieval Europe. Obviously, I'm not saying that in the judicial cases that I found before various courts, Jews were not always innocent, but there is a trope there, and we have to be aware of this trope. And for our lecture, I'm working more with the trail of the allegation rather than the actual accusation. So how does it start? What is it in Christianity that creates this idea that Jews of all people would be interested in attacking images? Well, in my mind, the starting point is the Inventio Crucis, the discovery of the true cross legend. From about the 5th century, the Roman poet Paulinus of Nola and then Tyrannius Rufinus wrote that Queen Helena, the mother of Constantine the Great, had come to Jerusalem to look for the true cross. The legend told how Helena gathered together 3,000 Jews, despite the fact, of course, that by the mid-4th century, there was no Jewish community in Jerusalem at this time. And one particular Jew, Judas, who you can see in this picture, is singled out as knowing about the cross, but at first refuses to cooperate. When Judas is about to die of starvation, he prays to God in Hebrew to reveal the location of the true cross on Golgotha. And through the revelation of the truth, the Jew, Judas, interesting name anyway, Judas, always appearing as this sort of quintessential Jewish figure, is then redeemed from Judaism and claimed by Christianity. In addition, the happy ending of the legend confirmed that the Jew's genuine conversion to Christianity was a consequence of the miracle that he had experienced. And the Latin version of the legend was known in Rome from around 500 and made its way into European vernacular literature and the liturgies of both the Greek and the Latin churches. And of course, actual fragments of the true cross, and this is really important, homilies, sermons, feast days celebrating the legend's so-called discovery began to be transmitted across Europe, confirming its popularity and disseminating its anti-Judaic focus. So this legend really allows for us two important factors. The first, that the idea in Western cultural memory that Jews and Judaism harbor keys to hidden truths as to where the true cross was. But secondly, and I think more important for our perspective, is that it allows Christian authors to activate their own notions of Jewish abuse of sacred items. And although legends were not usually invented for a purpose, they clearly could be reformulated as they circulated, especially if the message there could be used to fulfill a need. And as I'm going to show you, this narrative of the Inventio Crucis organized information on the Jew into a causal sequence, which actually influenced and bolstered moral tales that adapted themselves from it. As in many later desecration tales, there are three acts in the drama. The first, the Jew conceals and therefore clearly misuses the sacred Christian object. He hides it. Hiding, of course, is also, as I said earlier, a form of desecration because the Christian is prevented from venerating it. In the second, you have the miraculous powers of the object, unexpectedly compelling him to acknowledge and proclaim the truth of Christianity, meaning when the Jew witnesses the power of the image and what it does, the miraculous powers, he's going to convert to Christianity because he understands the importance of the image. And in the third, the Jew seeks baptism and becomes a convert. And all this is done through the sacred power of the object. And the consequences here, of course, are restorative, conversion rather than retributive justice or death. And now we come to stage 2 of the allegation. The subject of the Jew's relationship with miraculous images and the trope of a Jew as actual killers of the animated holy bodies rather than mere desecrators of sacred images are introduced next. And this happens in Byzantium. This happens as a result of the iconoclastic controversy, because descriptions of historical Jews committing crimes against Christian sacred images begin to appear in Byzantine chronicles from around the 6th century. And during the reign of Constantine V, who is considered the most iconoclastic emperor of the 8th and 9th century, iconophiles associated their iconoclastic opponents and their position on idolatry with Jews, typically denouncing them as blasphemers and destroyers of images. So the iconoclastic attack on images is interpreted as a strike at the sacred body depicted in the image. And it's really the first internal debate, and here you see a very ugly Jew attacking an image of Jesus. So it's really the first internal debate in Christianity where Jews represent the enemy for both sides, iconophiles versus iconoclasts, really concretizing the nature of the relationship between internal Christian developments regarding images and anti-Jewish accusations. And by the 8th century, iconoclastic as well as desecrating Jews had become useful villains in cautionary tales, both socially and theologically. The main message of all of these tales is that the religious icons, with their miraculous qualities, were unquestionably to be understood as a fundamental component of Christian spirituality. And I want to share with you today one of the tales. I would call it the most prolific tale and the strongest tale, and it's already been studied by the art historian Michael Baki. Christ of Beirut, although an original tale, was built upon familiar tropes of the Inventio Crucis legend, with the intention of bringing its message closer to the audience who could hear or read it. Now, the tale is said to have come about as being a report in one of these iconoclastic councils, which is really trying to bring back proper worship of images in Byzantine. But it's a really fascinating tale. And it describes how a Jew, as you can see here, lives in Beirut, we think it was set really sort of in the 4th century. He has an image of Christ in his home, which is obviously very strange. And he's completely oblivious to this image until he invites one night a group of Jews to come and eat with him in his house. And they are completely shocked that he has this image on his wall. How is it that a Jew would have an image of Christ on the wall of his house? And this is what they say to him. How do you as a Jew have the nerve to have such an image in your house? The host whose home it's in, wants to defend himself, stated with innocence that he had not noticed it before. then the guest becomes silent. The guests come together, they go to the rabbi suggests that they attack the image. And this is what you see in this image. And of course, there are so many all over Europe, and many of them in churches across Europe, describing this tale in particular. And when the Jews begin to attack the image, they shout out, "Whatever our fathers did to him, let us all do the same to the image." So again, this idea that by attacking the image, they're actually reenacting the crucifixion at the same time. But what they don't expect is this outpouring of blood. And this is what you see in this image. The Jews have attacked it, and they are completely surprised and shocked that blood comes out of the image. It is commonly known, they said, that they, our forefathers, pierced his side with a lance. Let us leave nothing out. Let us do that too. They've attacked the image, and then it begins to bleed. And here again, in this other miniature, you see the image, the crucifix being attacked, and then it's bleeding, and the Jews take the blood. They don't just collect the blood. And of course, I hope most of you are thinking, well, this is just so close to what we know of host desecration and blood libel. But then they use the blood to help them with their ailments. So you see the collection of blood here in this sort of bowl, and then the other hand touching the Jew who's sick. Obviously he's sick, he can't get out of bed, but the idea that somehow this blood is going to do good for the Jews. So Christ's blood is going to have its effect and do good for the Jews. And the final part of this story that really Christ of Beirut comes up and appears in so many different ways is the baptism of the Jews. You see here that they are being baptized in the church by the bishop. Some suggest that what we have is sort of this image of mother and child, possibly Mary and Jesus, looking on as finally the Jews are converted. So what we have without doubt is the introduction of blood into this. And it, of course, has Eucharistic symbolism. The miraculous power of Christ's blood enables the establishment of belief for the Jewish onlookers. It confirms that Christ's Eucharistic blood could be connected to an icon of Christ, and that the sacrificial death of Jesus could actually occur again in a passion painting. And this is really sort of the core text that is then copied by different chroniclers, particularly monks. We can look at this coming into England as part of the Marian tales, where the monks know about these Byzantine tales and they develop them further with using other images, not just of the crucifix, but here you can see images of Mary and Jesus as well. And now Jews are not merely attacking an image of Christ, but reenacting the crucifixion on passion images, causing them to bleed. But if we think about what's going on in medieval as well, is the fact that Jews are actually often given images, objects to keep as money lenders and pawnbrokers. And what you witness in some of these texts that come out, and this is from 1258, is this assumption that and this is coming from Pope Alexander, that the Christians must not give, and especially the clergymen must not give their objects to Jews because they do bad things with these images. And I really highlighted this in the red. And they, the Jews, like ingrate enemies of the cross and the Christian faith, treat these pledges with irreverence to the disgrace of the Christian religion. And they act so nefariously towards them is shameful to speak and horrible to hear. And this is something I think that we need to keep in the back of our minds as to what is going on in England. This was also a very famous text. This is the Cantigas de Santa Maria in Spain, 1260s. We have this depiction of this Marian tale of a Jew. You can see he's stealing. Always starts on the left-hand side at the top. He's stealing the image of Mary and Jesus from the church. He himself is led by the devil to put it inside the medieval toilet, the latrine. You can see him putting it in here, and then he dies. He dies because he's done a terrible crime in this one. Here, the Christian finds the image and takes it out of the latrine. His wife really tries to make it better, and they decide to put it up in their home. You can see what a poor quality the image is, because it's been in the latrine. But then, because the Christians venerate the image as they should, they are able to bring it back to its beautiful texture that you see here as well. And this really becomes very much part of an accusation, even I would say an allegation against the Jews as well, very much mixed with these ideas of blood libel, and that just as the Jews really extract blood from Christian children when they attack them and they do blood libel, so too had they extracted the blood from the image. I just want to stress that this allegation comes first. The allegation of the blood coming out of the image comes before either host desecration or blood libel. And in my mind, because it's about attacking, because it's about really using a knife and attacking the image, this then, host desecration and blood libel are both an extension of this action previously. And I don't think this has been stressed enough by medieval historians until now, that we have to see the image desecration as being part of the story, as being very, very much involved. The interesting thing is when this allegation moves to Spain, we could find it definitely in church architecture. This is actually in Majorca. You can see that the Jews are bending over. An interesting image of the crucifix. Obviously, it's not really. It looks like it's really Jesus, and they're actually testing him, but it's not. It's an image. It's a crucifix that they're attacking here as well. And what we see really, I think, is, and this is really when I think it leaves more of the allegation status and becomes an accusation, because obviously, after 1391, and you have the forced baptism of a large proportion of the Jewish communities in Spain, and I've really begun to trace this when we look at inquisitorial cases of conversos, of secret Jews in Spain, they are often accused of image desecration. Now, I think, without doubt, that it comes from this long allegation that I've been able to trace. And particularly by 1478, and this is really just before the Inquisition comes to Spain and starts prosecuting the secret Jews for it, there is an expectation that the new Christians, as they're called, actually keep images of Mary and Jesus in their homes. This is 1478. We desire and declare that every Christian should have at his home the painted image of the cross where Christ was sacrificed, and some painted images of the Virgin and other saints that would provoke the inhabitants and arousing them to devotion. And what we see in Spain is this sudden increase in the number of images in people's homes, and in the importance of image friendliness as a test of good Christians, and charges of image hostility really begin to multiply against new Christians. And the presence and treatment of domestic images in Spanish homes really becomes a test of Christian orthodoxy according to the New Inquisition. And it was in these private spaces that most conversos, most secret Jews, were accused of committing crimes of violence. If we look at trials, inquisitors really imagine that secret Jews are defiantly acting against these images in their homes, and two strong allegations really come forward. And the first is that crypto-Jews show their fidelity to Judaism by desecrating images, and the second, that professing Jews had tendencies to desecrate Christian images to show their disgust of Christian practices and idolatrous habits. Now, since these conversos anyway are seen as Jews, the idea that the Jews continue to do this in secret is something that is mixed together with this. Well, this is how the Jews really act. So even though they're supposed to be converted now and supposed to be showing fidelity to Christian images. We worry about the status of those images in their homes. And if we study inquisitorial investigations of real flesh and blood conversos who are accused of image desecration, we find the accusation continually appearing in lists of many accusations, and there's always a long list of the conversos that they're accused of, observing Jewish laws in private, of celebrating the Shabbat, and celebrating Jewish festivals, refusing to eat pork, and taking no notice of Lent, etc., etc. And the allegation of image desecration does not stand alone in Spain. One thing interesting, though, as well for me, is that when I looked at this allegation and accusation in Spain, what I found was a new sort of a new form of desecration, and that is, and it's really associated with converso activity, a particular charge of scourging, of whipping images, and this is something that really appears over and over again. So that's Spain. Finally, before I finish, I want to turn to Italy. From the 15th century, I would say Italian archives actually preserve many judicial records for image desecration against professing Jews, not conversos, because remember, the Italian Inquisition is allowed to bring professing Jews before its courts. And it really becomes possible to compare the Jew who's brought to court on charges of desecrating or showing disrespect for images with the fictive Jew of the medieval tales and legends. And it may be that the Jews portrayed by these court records is as much an artificial construct as the Jew of the stories. But he is the result, of course, of a different process, which usually stems from a denunciation by a fellow Christian or an inquisitor, investigation then by a tribunal, the receipt of evidence which is often conflicting, and a decision to punish or release him. And that's the status that it came to. And why in many ways I just wanted to sort of show that this was my starting point. I was finding so many accusations against Jews in Italy. Okay, we can say Italy, not surprising, we've had this incredible Renaissance, the center of Christian art. But it seemed that it was built on something more, that there was a way of thinking in the Christian mind that meant that the Jew was always going to be accused of this crime. And the total number of known judicial cases in which Jews were charged with desecrating images from the beginning of the 14th century to the end of the 17th century that I've collected is now 71 cases. And this number is continually increasing the more archives I get to. And I think, as I said before, it's hardly surprising that Italy, out of all places, should have such a large number of cases. It reflects the large number of Jews, presence of Jews in the peninsula, in daily contact as well with Christians who really frequently used this object. But it's also interesting to see how the legend of the Christ of Beirut that I mentioned earlier also finds its expression in Italy as well. And many cases, which I haven't really spoken about here because I can't, the idea that images in Italy respond miraculously when they are attacked to Jews. Okay, so some final thoughts. How am I going to bring all this together? So I think it was very much traveling tales that above all enabled Christians collectively to imagine Jews desecrating images. The Christ of Beirut legend and other image desecration tales really moved across Europe, where listeners shaped shared knowledge, especially when Christian images began to define really who fitted into society and who did not. And this really was a recurring pattern of anti-Judaism that I think hasn't been given, as I said before, its full attention. Jews became the other against which Christianity defined itself, and here their main function was to demonstrate the truth of Christianity. And in many of the tales, of course, Jews were sort of obliged by attacking images, which then demonstrated their miraculous power, sometimes causing the Jew to convert, to acknowledge the truth of Christianity, and possibly escape punishment. Yet, of course, assertions and ways of thinking die hard, and the belief that the Jew was inclined to damage images persisted well after the close of the 17th century. Because even though the 19th century was to bring this secularization of art and society, making the allegation definitely less common, it seems that as late as 1903, Jews in Faro in Portugal were accused of passing their time in the synagogue by breaking up wooden crucifixes with hammers. And even today, this crucifix known as El Senhor del Tambo de Monteiro, which was supposed to have been scourged by Portuguese conversos in the 1630s, is even preserved in the church in Cuzco in Peru and remains an object of popular veneration. This famous case is commemorated in Peruvian poetry, folklore, and iconography. So this sense of Jews who attack images of the majority, who have no sense, I think, of artistic ability, and therefore will prey on those of their enemies, contributed significantly to the creation of the modern anti-Semitic perception of Jews in some art historical surveys, anyway, as lacking their own identity, they don't have any cultural and artistic ability, and they're continually preying upon the art of their host nation. And I think if we just think about it too, this perception, which of course was reiterated by Richard Wagner, would last until the 1980s, when finally Jewish art began to be regarded as a subject worthy of its own study at Israeli universities. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was really fascinating and full of things which are really demanding discussion. I'm going to ask the first question. I'm encouraging everyone. We have a couple of questions already from Avi Gold and Paul Kurdish. Please, others who have questions, put them into the chat room. And I'm going to ask Kathy to speculate to what extent do you think that these accusations and allegations come from some kind of projection? What I mean is that, in fact, Christians often desecrated Torah scrolls. So, and other Jews didn't have pictures and they didn't have sculptures, but they certainly had holy objects that often came in for some rather gross treatment. To what extent do you think the suspicion that Jews were interested in doing the things which you've described with these amazing visuals, does it come out of projection?
I think that projection is definitely the starting point. There's a deep sense of, hold on a minute, what is it about the Jews that they are remaining an anachronic people, a people without their images, without a need for an image? And Christianity really, you can see at the beginning, the 11th, 12th century, there are so many theological texts where churchmen are saying it's okay, we're only using them as didactic instruments. This is a way of helping a very illiterate population to understand what Christianity is. So we're not using them as objects of worship. And this playoff from one of the other is very, very much part of the story. There's a whole aspect of looking into the Jewish sources as well to understand how the Jews deal with always being in an environment which is sort of ubiquitous, full of images as well. This idea of the Torah scroll, I think, is very interesting, and it's something that I've really been trying to trace. One of my theories is that if we put the crusading chronicles that the Jews write after really a time when the Jews are being attacked, one thing they really highlight is how the Christians attack their Torah scrolls, and this comes up over and over again in the different Christian chronicles. And I think that there's a sense to which the Jews also need to alleviate or to have some object that they too can compare with those of the Christians. So absolutely, without doubt, projection plays a huge part in this.
Very interesting, your suggestion that just as Christians were responding to Jews, Jews were responding to Christians.
Always. Yeah, absolutely. There's never one side of the argument. I think you always have to look and see the opposite of what's going on.
So this is a great segue to Avi Gold's question. Avi, is it possible for you to unmute yourself and to ask your very learned question? Avi? Okay, I'm going to start asking the question, and Avi, if you get unmuted, I will continue. You have to unmute yourself. You have to push the little button at the bottom. I have it on the bottom left, where there's a microphone that says mute. It's red with a line going through it. Just click on it. Meanwhile, I'll start to ask your question. Mishnah Avodah Zarah 4:5 refers to Mishnah Avodah Zarah has some references which might be something which is motivating some of these beliefs about Jews. Also, and is there any reference to that in the allegations? And is there any reference to Rachel hiding her father Laban's household gods and goddesses, the Teraphim?
Nothing in the Christian sources. It's a great question, Avi. Thank you so much. I really did study the Mishnah well, the Avodah Zarah, especially when I was looking at sort of it as a Jewish response. How are Jews supposed to respond? You know, originally we see them being very iconoclastic in the Hebrew Bible. The Jews are told when they come into the land of Israel that they must attack the images, the idols of the other. But that changes. And if you look, I would argue that what we have in this Mishnah particularly is the sense that it's better not to respond, it's better not to do anything physical. And we have this idea of to turn your eyes away, not to look at these images. And my argument is that what we're actually seeing here, I think, is this sense that the Jews are being trained how not to respond physically. And I think you're right. I think that, you know, this definitely could have stimulated any Jew who becomes a Christian and he has access to Hebrew is able to look at these sources and say, you know, this is how Jews were supposed to act in the land. But you don't see some of these theories really taken up by Christianity as much as you thought. And absolutely no place did I find any reference to Lavan and the hiding.
Okay. Also from Avi, the last Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat has stories about the Jews using blood for curative purposes, and it references the nail of a crucified one as a superstition alleged to have curative powers.
Right, absolutely. Also, no reference to Christianity really taking that up. They don't seem to know that. I also sort of see reference to it in Jewish sources, but nothing. Christianity is not smart enough yet to really worry about that in terms of its polemical literature.
And here is one on a different topic. Was there any interaction between claims of image desecration and the text of Pugio Fidei?
Pugio Fidei really is an interesting text. It's very much set in Spain, of the Dominican meaning, but you don't necessarily see it actually turn yet to conversos being accused of image desecration. They are accused of other things. I think I was sort of finding in Spain quite a slow process about this, and this is why I really wanted to stress this 1478 text. Spain in general, and this I really, I'd be interested to know if any of our participants can help me with this. Spain is very slow to absorb imagery into Christianity. It's almost like a delayed reaction. Whereas I would say sort of England, France, Germany, you see this use of imagery. Spain's a little slower. And so therefore I had trouble finding actual accusations against Jews before 1391 or before the 1492 when the Jews are expelled of them really being accused regularly of image desecration. But what was so fascinating was that after 1492 and from the 1480s when the Inquisition really comes to Spain, then you find that this is just added on, this is picked up, and this is what I try to explain, particularly as an allegation against conversos. You don't find it in the Pugio Fidei.
Okay, so this is based on Paul Kurtish's question. Since many Christians felt that just Jewish rejection of the whole concept of Christ was a kind of repudiation of Jesus as the Messiah, and it was a kind of desecration in itself, what does the imagined Jewish physical desecration, what does that add? Isn't it bad enough that the Jews already rejected Christ? What does the desecration add to their original sin?
I think in particular what it adds is an ability for Christians to understand how important Christian images are. And I think that that's a huge thing. I mean, this is something that is not ideal. It's not great to rely on images, to need something visual to connect to God. And if the Jew is seen to be attacking that, not only do we keep going the idea of the reenactment of the crucifixion, but we also channel it in another direction, which means that images become more important. Images can suddenly be connected with the real prototypes, with the real presence of Jesus, with the fact that they bleed because they too are an extension of the miracle of what Jesus was. I think it's an extremely clever ploy of getting people to understand that you need to venerate images, you need to understand their importance, and very occasionally they too will respond to you. They will weep, right? We still have in Catholic countries, you know, these claims that images have bled or they've wept or there's been some sort of interaction. It's still going on in our time. It's fascinating in the early modern time, because you see these inquisitors sort of going to various places to see, is this really some sort of a miraculous action? Is this some sort of, you know, bleeding that we need to be conscious of? And then once an image bleeds, its status completely changes. Usually it's taken off the wall, it's put in a church, it's venerated, people come, they create pilgrimages around these images. It's a whole new ball game. Sylvia, I can't hear you.
There's a reason for that. It's ironic, isn't it, that the desecration then becomes a vehicle for sacralization. What the Jews mean as a desecration makes the item more sacred.
But can I just to add something here, Sylvia, which I think is important, and I don't know if I stressed enough. It's not iconoclasm. Iconoclasm is about the complete destruction of an image. And in all of these tales, the Jew does not have the power to do that, because he can't, because there's something holy in the image. If he destroyed it completely, then it would be, you know, then it would completely defeat the story in the first place, or the legend in the first place. And that's why I think, just going back to this sort of the discovery of the true cross, because that's, I think, a very, very interesting beginning of this idea that the Jew is given a special task, that he has to test the image, that he needs to, you know, he's curious about it. Why is it that the Christians pay so much attention to the image? Is there something there? He's a curious bystander. And then the incredible thing about the tales is that by making it bleed, that's that's proof of the presence of Jesus, and therefore the need to convert on the Jews' part.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you about something else that you talked about, that both in Italy and in Spain, you have this constant suspicion of the conversos.
Right.
And from your way of analyzing, you're talking about this historical era's anti-Semitism rooted and grounded in Christianity. So we tend to think of that kind of anti-Semitism as religious rather than racial.
Yes.
But the fact that they kept suspecting the Jews of being essentially Jews, that no matter if they converted, they would always essentially be Jewish. Do you see that as a kind of proto-racism, or you think it's primarily religious?
I do have problems to consider inquisitional Spain as some sort of racist anti-Semitism. I must say, look, I teach anti-Semitism, been teaching anti-Semitism for years, the history of anti-Semitism. And I really struggle with this because I really see that that's really at the core of this still. I think it's very difficult to bring in race here. But of course, there are scholars who argue this very strongly, who see it, the blood laws and everything. This is the beginning of that. But it's still so much a racial hatred. And when the converso is brought before the Inquisition, he's being seen as a Jew who still practices his Judaism. So that's really sort of that's how I think about it.
So you still think of it as primarily a religious and thus different than what emerges later when
Absolutely.
It becomes primarily racial. Very interesting. So as you were speaking, I was waiting for you to get to the Eucharist, which you in fact did when you were talking about the emphasis on something that could look like wood or look like brass or stone, and yet somehow miraculously turn into the body of Christ and the blood of Christ. This emphasis on blood is a very strange parallel to the Jewish removing of blood.
Right.
Do you see any connections here? Any attempts to reverse and change the Jewish aversion to blood? What do you see as the relationship between Judaism and that period of Christianity at that time?
Well, let me just I didn't get a chance to talk about this, but there is actually, and we find this in Thomas Aquinas particularly, he's very concerned about this idea of Christ's blood floating all over Europe. There's a whole, especially in sort of 13th century, there's a suggestion that Christ had left some of his blood on the cross, and that now it was being circulated in Europe. And this was also problematic because people didn't know really if that was true, because how could Christ, if he is sort of revived and he goes up to heaven, then surely he didn't leave any blood on the cross. So that becomes an issue, and Thomas Aquinas really says that it's just what comes out of images is symbolic and not the real blood, and that's something that's really emphasized. And then we see, and especially in that century, the beginning then of host desecration and blood libel, which become, I think, much more serious. In terms of the Jews' association with blood, in my mind, it's very similar to the Judensau, right? This whole aspect, why are Jews associated with pigs, right? They don't eat pigs. But again, it's this sense of, we don't really, we think that's how Jews behave, but let's really think again. They're just pretending to do this. And you see that with so many things. You see that with the imagery of the golden calf, right? What does the golden calf story really say? That Jews are idolaters, that really they worship the golden calf because that was their true moment, right? They pretend that it's not true and that it was a mistake and that they were punished and they still had to bear the sin of that from, continually. But it's always the opposite, right? Because you want to prove that they're deceitful, that they have this religious standing, but it's not a true status.
There's a wonderful midrash, actually, that God was preparing to really give the Jews what for over the golden calf. And then he heard what all the nations of the world were saying about the Jews in relationship to the golden calf being actually idolatrous. And that's why the Jews never really got very punished, because God made it.
He knew what was coming.
He knew what was coming and he wasn't going to pile on. And as I'm repeating this to you, I'm thinking about the fact that many of the rabbis who transmitted those particular midrashim were living through exactly what you're describing. And that really forms their frame of reference in creating this narrative.
Just one more thing. I mean, some of this, the Jewish response, I think, to this allegation of images is also taken up sort of 13th, 14th century, where you see some rabbinical sort of midrashic stories of Jews actually urinating on images.
Yes.
And then, and that is done, I think, in conjunction with what's going on in the Christian Rome. But it's done in a way of laughing at this allegation, right? The Jews aren't confident enough where they're living to actually necessarily give Jews advice as to what to do. But there's a certain sense, and I think, we see this in many aspects of polemical literature, such as the bird's head Haggadah and the whole image of the Jew, depicting himself in a certain way. There is an ability to sort of laugh at what Christianity is accusing them of, and in many ways, I think that keeps them going as well, because they're not living in a bubble. They know exactly what Christians are accusing them of.
Oh. Well, Professor Katherine Aron-Beller, thank you so much for a really, really fascinating step backwards into a history which unfortunately is with us all too much today. Really an amazing talk, and we really are very grateful to you and to all of you who came to listen and participate and offered your wonderful insights as well. Everyone, take care.